This is Trinity Trigger, an action RPG that very clearly wears a Secret of Mana inspired heart on its sleeve, but that's not necessarily a good thing. While it has a great art style and some neat ideas, it feels beholden to Secret of Mana's design in a way that makes it feel outdated and unfun. The world of Trinity Trigger revolves around two sets of gods, the gods of order and the gods of chaos. Long ago, these gods had warriors fight on their behalf to determine control of the world. The story here picks up with one of the three main characters, Cyan, being chosen as the warrior of chaos. He's kinda unsure how he got this role, and so he sets off on a journey to learn why. Through his journey, he'll be accompanied by Elise and eventually a traveler named Xantis. He'll go town and dungeon hopping, learning more about his origins as well as acquiring new powers, which I'll touch on in the gameplay segment. Now, I like certain aspects of the presentation. The character portraits in particular looked really nice. It has this really cool painterly ink line look that I find appealing. And also there was some pretty high quality voice acting.
It's fine. Doesn't even hurt or anything. Enough about that. Let's eat.
That is to say that I didn't find the story very compelling. Overall, the story didn't grab me and didn't really make me care about the characters in any meaningful way. And also, I typically don't like this way of presenting a story with these character portraits and just text boxes. And I understand the budgetary constraints with this game, and this seems like a good way to get around it, but to me, it's just boring. Now, one series that gets a pass with this is Persona because the characters and story are much more interesting. Not to mention the character models are actually animating in the background, and there are also more cinematic cutscenes from time to time. Now, if you're more tolerant of this style than I am, you might enjoy it, especially because of how good the voice acting is and how high quality the character portraits are, but for me, it just didn't work. Gameplay-wise, Trinity Trigger is an isometric action RPG. You'll have a party of 3 characters that you can swap between on the fly, each with unique weapons and attack styles. As you progress through the game, you'll acquire new weapon types, and certain enemies are weak to specific weapons, so you'll need to be constantly swapping out different characters and different weapons to figure out what weaknesses you need to use. Now, your arsenal is pretty basic. You can dodge roll, you have a basic attack, and then you have a meter that builds where you can use this powered up state. As you explore the dungeons, they also have light puzzle elements like flipping switches to open up doors or smashing through walls to discover secret rooms. Overall, it wasn't too challenging in my experience, but was fairly satisfying. However, other reviewers I was talking to had some issues, so your experience may vary. Now, on paper, this all sounds awesome. Some good hack and slash combat, swapping weapons, some light puzzle elements. That all sounds great. It kind of reminds me of the 2020 remake of Trials of Mana, which I loved. However, this game has 2 major issues that hold it back. The first is this godforsaken stamina meter. I genuinely have no idea why it's in this game other than because Secret of Mana had one. It constantly interrupts the flow of combat and quickly becomes frustrating. Imagine this, you're playing a game and every so often someone takes your controller away for a second before you can keep playing. That's what playing Trinity Trigger feels like. Now, the one thing I think could justify this stamina meter would be the fact that perfect dodges refill it. However, the problem is that enemies attack way too slow and they die too quickly for this to matter. Now, if this was something like a Platinum Games style game where combat was blistering fast, that might be a cool gimmick, but here it's just annoying. And it makes a character like Xantis almost unplayable because of how slow his attacks are and how much stamina his attacks drain. After trying him for a few fights, I basically never used him again unless it was absolutely necessary. Now, you can craft accessories, one of which provides more stamina recovery. However, it wasn't nearly enough to make this tolerable. And the second big issue is the menus. Here's how they work. One shoulder button opens up the item menu. Now, there's 4 types of items, but the problem is you can only hotkey one of each type. So trying to open this menu in the middle of a heated fight is just so incredibly clunky, especially if the item you're looking for isn't hotkeyed. You have to click through like 3 layers of menus just to use it. Now, the other shoulder button opens up a weapon wheel. Because you don't get as many weapons, this isn't as bad, but still doesn't feel super good. To be honest, it's kind of hard to articulate just how incredibly bad this feels to try and navigate in the middle of a fight. In an action game, I don't want to be fumbling through menus just to use a potion. Again, this feels like it was only here because that's what Secret of Mana did. Now, here's an incredibly easy fix that I came up with. Just let us hotkey items to the D-pad. If you need more items, maybe holding down a shoulder button opens up 4 more options. That all said, I cannot believe they didn't do this, especially because the game doesn't use the D-pad for anything. Now, I'm not a game designer, but having played hundreds of RPGs over the years, even I could tell you this would feel way better to play with. I feel like if they fixed the menus and removed the stamina meter altogether, Trinity Trigger would be way more more fun to play. Now I'm hoping that developers are open to fixing this because based on other reviewers I've talked to, these two things are going to be a big problem. Now I'll also say this, I've talked to others like David Vink that are old school Secret of Mana fans who really like Trinity Trigger, so your enjoyment will definitely vary. Now I hate that I had to spend so much of this review talking about those two aspects, but combat is a giant portion of what you do in this game, so I felt like it was important to talk about these in depth. Now one positive thing I will say about the exploration in this game is that it always tells you how many treasure chests are in certain areas, so it kind of incentivizes you to explore, and the game also very plainly leads you to like quote-unquote hidden areas where you can find certain chests and things like that. So I actually really enjoyed the exploration aspect of this game. It's just a shame that the combat didn't match up. Trinity Trigger's presentation is kinda all over the place, and you get a sense of what you're in for basically from the moment you start the game. Now let's just examine the scene for a moment. Look how crisp this character looks juxtaposed to the rest of the room. It looks like all the textures are still loading, but that's just how the game looks. It's very bizarre. I'm also not the biggest fan of this chibi art style, but the character designs for the character portraits look great. Again, I know there are budgetary restrictions, but it would have been nice if they could have translated these character portraits into a better in-game model. And while the story wasn't super interesting for me, the voice acting was pretty great. Much like the gameplay, you can see the bones of something promising here, but ultimately the game's budget holds it back from its true potential. Trinity Trigger has a lot of promise, but ultimately left me disappointed. The idea of a AA budget JRPG with action combat and light puzzle elements sounded super fun. However, the development team made too many odd and quite frankly outdated design decisions to make it enjoyable for me. Your enjoyment of this game will largely hinge on whether you have nostalgia for Secret of Mana or not. I've never played it, so I don't, but if you do, then you might actually really dig this game. However, if you're like me and you've never played Secret of Mana, you're probably better off just picking up the Trials of Mana remake. It's way better from top to bottom, and you could probably get it pretty cheap by now. And if you don't know what I'm talking about and you want to learn more about Trials of Mana, be sure to check out my review for it right here. And special thanks to Reset Switch, Tyler Kuzawa, and the Miyazaki Man for supporting me over on Patreon. To get exclusive videos and other cool perks, consider supporting me over on patreon.com/thegaming shelf. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.